What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9, bringing you another video here. This one is going to be some gameplay footage with the newly previewed Sabine Wren. So, Sabine is a character from the Star Wars Rebels TV show, and I believe she also features in the new Ahsoka show, though I have not watched that. And so she was just previewed today on the Fantasy Flight Games Instagram page as a new hero for Star Wars Unlimited TCG. And I decided I was going to get some quick gameplay recording here and bring out some footage of Sabine Wren in battle against the Empire. So we have here, the footage here is from my perspective. So Sabine Wren, as an action, you can exhaust her to deal 1 damage to each base. As an epic action, she can deploy at only 4 resources. So that is actually the earliest that any leader deploys in the game. My opponent running Grand Moff Tarkin, for 1 resource, you can exhaust him to give an experience token to an Imperial unit, and he deploys at 5 or more resources. So Tarkin has a very good commander ability. This player is also using the Energy Conversion Lab. Epic action, play a unit that costs 6 or less from your hand, give it ambush for the phase. And so I'm going to start things off here. I won the roll to go first. I play the Rebel Pathfinder. So 2 cost, 2/3 with Saboteur. When this unit attacks, ignore Sentinel and defeat the defender's shields. I think it might have been better to play the Alliance X-Wing here, I'm not sure, but I did end up going with the Pathfinder. I think maybe because I have the Shoot First in hand, which should allow the Pathfinder to kind of punch above its weight against enemy units, and that's less likely to be relevant for the X-Wing. My opponent doesn't have a turn 1 play, just takes the initiative, and yeah. I will use Sabine's ability to deal 1 damage to each player. And the opponent's energy conversion lab there actually starts at only 25 life, so that will take the opponent down to 24 and myself to 29. I am using Cunning with the generic Administrator's Tower as my base, so 30 life just gives the Cunning icon no text. And this card was just previewed today. It doesn't have a lot of card pool. There are no aggression heroic cards that have been previewed other than Sabine Wren herself. So this is definitely very far from an optimized deck, and I am also not necessarily an expert at playing it, but we will see what I can do regardless. I end up deciding to resource that X-Wing. I think my hope is to play the Starwing Scout this turn. Arguably, this was a mistake. I should have kept the X-Wing in hand, maybe resource the Waylay or something, on the grounds that I would then be able to play both the Shoot First and the X-Wing on the same turn. As it stands right now, even though the Shoot First only costs 1, I don't have a 2-drop, so if I play it, there's nothing else that I can do. So maybe a bit of an error on my resourcing decision there, but we'll see whether or not it ends up costing me. All right, my opponent Thork has the initiative. Thinking about some different options. Sabine is really a very different style of deck than some of the other ones that we've seen. She's the most pure aggro leader of any of them. There is another aggression leader, Darth Vader, has already been previewed, but he's very different in his style because he is much more expensive, and the most common setup for him has actually been to run him with green as kind of a ramp deck. So it's much less like a traditional aggro build. So my opponent comes in here with a Cell Block Guard, which is a 3/3 with Sentinel. And so in this situation, I could potentially use the Shoot First to sneak past the Cell Block Guard, or to attack the Cell Block Guard and defeat him. I end up deciding I'm going to play the Starwing Scout. The thing about the Rebel Pathfinder is that because the Pathfinder has Saboteur, I can actually sneak past. My opponent is then like, wait a minute, I should have used the Energy Conversion Lab. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. So I let the opponent use the Energy Conversion Lab there to ambush in the Cell Block Guard and take out my Rebel Saboteur. Or Rebel Pathfinders, I believe the card's name. But one way or another, I won't be able to use the Saboteur ability this turn, whether that be to sneak past, or just maybe even having the card attack directly, forget the Saboteur ability, just do damage. I end up using Sabine's ability here. My opponent takes the initiative. Looking at these cards, I end up deciding to resource that copy of Waylay. And the funny thing is, I can actually deploy Sabine Wren this turn. It's really crazy how quickly you get to you start with 2 resources and you resource one card per turn under normal circumstances. So you can get to 4 resources in like in 2 turns under normal conditions. Or on the you can get to it on the 3rd turn. And if you play a copy of Resupply, you can actually get to 4 resources on the 2nd turn. And so Sabine Wren has the ability to deploy onto the field much sooner than other leaders. The downside, though, is that her stats are a lot worse. I believe she's a 2/5 on her unit side, which is the weakest of any unit in the any leader in the game. Though she does have a nice ability, every time she attacks, it does 1 damage to the enemy base. So even though she's a 2/5, she is still getting that little bit of bonus damage that befits an aggro character, in my opinion. So we now see a TIE Advanced being played by my opponent. That's a 4-cost 3/2, and it will give 2 experience tokens to another Imperial unit when it's played. So that's going to kind of level up the cell block guard there. The cell block guard is now a 5/5 or a 5/5 with 2 damage on them, so a 5/3, I suppose. Starwing Scout is then going to attack the base, just highlighting the TIE Advanced card there. 4-cost 3/2 when played, give 2 experience tokens to another friendly Imperial unit. Very strong card, in my opinion. Starwing Scout hits the enemy base for 4. I haven't actually played anything yet this turn. My opponent still has the readied Cell Block Guard. The Cell Block Guard is actually a big obstacle for Sabine here because at strength 5, he can kill Sabine in 1 hit. However, my opponent chooses to attack my base for 5. I think it may have been better to pass in this situation. I don't say so for sure, but that would threaten Sabine. I use Sabine's leader side ability for 1 damage to each base. You want to keep doing that as an aggro player, try to get the opponent to run out of life quickly before they get their bigger units onto the board. My opponent takes the initiative here. I'm going to deploy Sabine. So there's Sabine's unit side for 2/5 on attack, deal 1 damage to each enemy base. She is a rebel unit as well. And then I'm going to play that Shoot First. So Shoot First is a 1-cost cunning event. It gives a unit +1/+0 for an attack, and it deals its combat damage before the opponent does. Attack with unit gets +1/+0 for this attack and deals its combat damage before the defender. If the defender is defeated, it deals no combat damage. So in this case, the 3 damage from the buffed Sabine takes down that cell block guard, and I don't take the 5 damage in return, which would otherwise be lethal. Now the downside is unfortunately I'm in another situation where I don't have an easy card to play in addition to the Shoot First. So it ends up just being that one. And not the biggest turn necessarily, but I do get Sabine onto the board. I have that Starwing Scout, which is a 4/1, and when it is defeated, you draw 2 cards if you had the initiative. However, my opponent currently has the initiative, so that card draw from the Starwing Scout won't be relevant if it's killed this turn. And I believe that is very likely. And so indeed, I think we're seeing the opponent attacking the Starwing Scout with the tie advanced there. So we trade units, and I don't get the card draw because it's my opponent's initiative. I could play Dodonna here. I could surprise strike Sabine into the enemy base. I could play the rogue operative there. I surprise strike Sabine into the enemy base. Attack with the unit gets +3/+0 for this attack. So Sabine does 5 damage with the attack, and then 1 with her on attack ability for a total of 6 damage to the enemy base. And I already have my opponent down to 11 life while I'm at 22. This is, it's a very aggro playstyle. I'm trying to take down the enemy base as quickly as possible before some of the bigger Imperial units get to see play. Thork, considering his options here, spends 3 to play General Veers, a 3-cost 3/3 that gives +1/+1 to other friendly Imperial units. And I, however, I have a solid counter to General Veers here. So other friendly Imperial units get +1/+1, and he is a 3/3. I am going to, however, play my copy. I believe I play my copy of Open Fire here. Um, no, actually, I decide to play the Rogue Operative instead. So that's a 3-cost 2/4. When this unit attacks, ignore Sentinel and defeat the defender's shield, and it gets +2/+0 when attacking. I think I've decided I'm just going to go more aggro, try to get more units on the field that can damage the opponent. My opponent then plays Tarkin. So Tarkin is 2/7 and gives a friendly unit an experience token when he attacks. I take the initiative. I think I'm thinking here, okay, if he attacks with Tarkin, Veers gets an experience counter 4/4. Then I have the initiative and I can potentially take him out with the Rogue Operative if I need to, or I can just push the base more aggressively. I do think that's arguably a mistake because I think it may have been better for me to try and pick off Veers more imminently. My opponent then plays Admiral Piet, who is a 2-cost 1/4. Each friendly non-leader unit that costs 6 or more gains ambush. So that's going to be actually quite threatening in the later game here as we're getting up to 6 resources, and we could see cards like the like the AT-8 ST or the Gladiator Star Destroyer deploying and attacking on the same turn. And so we then see Grand Moff Tarkin decides to deal the damage to Sabine Wren. So Sabine gets hit for 3, only 2 life left. She would get hit for 2, but Veers gives Tarkin +1/+1. And Tarkin takes 2. Then there's an experience token assigned to Veers. I draw a wing leader and a fleet lieutenant. I'm thinking this turn I'm probably going to want to pay 2 3 costs here. I do think it might have been better for me to use that open fire on Veers rather than playing out the Rogue Operative here. Not entirely sure. Still a deck that I'm getting used to. So in this situation, I'm thinking, so Veers is a 4/4 and buffing his other 2 units. I could just attack the base. So I could, for instance, use the Fleet Lieutenant to have either Sabine or the Rogue Operative attack the base. I end up deciding I'll use the Fleet Lieutenant to trade Sabine for Veers. So that way, Veers is taken out, which not only removes his only unit on the field right now that can kill the Rogue Operative in 1 hit, but it also means that the base takes 1 damage from Sabine's on attack ability. And I'm hoping now that I'm going to be able to send in my Rogue Operative to hit the base for 4, maybe buffed by the Wing Leader even, hitting the base for 6. The opponent's only units on the field right now aren't big enough to take down the Rogue Operative. Thork, considering his options here, both players are on 6 resources. He does have full resources, and if he has a 6-cost unit, he can put it into play with ambush thanks to Admiral Piet. Let's see what he goes for here. It's actually a 5-cost instead, it looks like. So I believe it ends up being the also relatively newly previewed card here, Agent Callus. Agent Callus takes the field, card that was just previewed yesterday. 5-cost 4/4 with ambush. So when you play this, you may ready and attack an opposing unit. And additionally, Callus has an ability where every time the first time in each turn a unique unit is destroyed, you can draw a card. Now, in this situation, I don't have any unique units to destroy. Yeah, when another unique unit is defeated, you may draw a card. Use the ability only once per turn. Callus swings in and takes down the Rogue Operative. I then play the Wing Leader, and I grant 2 experience tokens to my Fleet Lieutenant. Callus is wounded, but still on the field, took 2 damage there. My opponent still has Tarkin and Piet, but the 2 of them combined still wouldn't be able to kill the now 5/5 Fleet Lieutenant, which is potentially going to be a problem. There is still 1 resource remaining for Thork, so we could see a 1-cost unit like the TIE Fighter or come out here. I think the TIE Fighter is the only option. He doesn't have a red aggression aspect icon. So he would not be able to play. He would not be able to play out the Death Star Stormtrooper. I take the initiative, and my opponent hits my base with Piet for another 1 damage. So both players have been losing some life right now. I draw a Surprise Strike, which I'm very happy to see, and an Asteroid Sanctuary. Also a pretty solid card, quite frankly. So in this situation, I have, and I did, I believe, use Sabine's ability somewhere in there for 1 damage to both bases, or I just forgot to ready her up. So in this situation, I have a pretty direct line to the enemy base, so there's no sentinel or anything to stop me. I swing in for 5 damage, and I think this was a minor misplay. I think I should have played the surprise strike for the +3. My reasoning at the time was this way I can get a surprise kill on my opponent by playing the surprise strike on the wing leader, who doesn't look like it's like threatening, but would be able to take out the base. However, if I went for the more direct play and played the surprise strike on my fleet lieutenant now, the enemy base would be at 2 life. The wing leader would then be threatening lethal, and my opponent would have to deal with it. And then, even if he dealt with it, I could use Sabine's ability and put the opponent on 1 life. And then next turn, all I need to do is use Sabine's ability and win the game. So I think I got a little too tricky for my own good here with I'm going to play the surprise strike on the second attack for the surprise win. I don't think that was actually a very good idea. My opponent looking at his discard pile there. And however, I am getting really close to lethal. I have lethal on board here. My opponent is going to, so my opponent goes and deals 1 damage to my base with Piet, and then is like, wait, no, I forgot you had that space unit. Let me take that back. I'm like, sure, yeah, we're playing a friendly game. I think I'm not sure if it was just this time or if it was multiple times, but I have definitely forgotten to use Sabine's ability and been like, wait, can I use that instead of passing? And my opponent has allowed that. We are playing around with an unreleased game, and a bunch of these cards came out very recently. Sabine came out today. Callus came out yesterday. Some of the other cards are relatively recent previews as well, I believe. And so he's now thinking, okay, I got to do something that is going to clear that wing leader and prevent me from taking more damage to the base this turn. And so we see 4 resources being played for the card. So this is the command card. Choose 2 in any order. One is give 2 experience tokens to a unit. One is a friendly unit deals damage equal to its power to a non-unique enemy. One is put this into play as a resource. And then the last ability for command is I didn't see it there when I had it zoomed in, but I will look it up. In any case, the ones that he selected was to give 2 experience tokens to Callus and to deal damage. I play Asteroid Sanctuary to exhaust an enemy unit. I exhaust Callus, and it also gives a shield token to a friendly unit that costs 3 or less. So in this case, that's a shield token to my fleet lieutenant. My opponent hits the base there. I take the initiative. And now it's looking pretty favorable for me. I've taken the initiative without playing. I've taken the initiative without using Sabine's ability, because if my fleet lieutenant can swing in there, it will just win the game. My opponent attacks my base here with his Tarkin and his Admiral Piet, and puts an experience counter, I believe, on a cell block guard that he just played. So now my potential lethal attack, or no, he put the experience token on the powerful agent Callus. So now my potential attack to win the game is blocked. I am not in a position where I would be able to push through, because I would have to attack that cell block guard, which is not where I want to be. Now, luckily, I do have kind of a remedy for that scenario, which is the open fire in hand. I decide I'm not going to resource. I open fire to deal 4 damage to the cell block guard. 3 cost. Open fire is a 3 cost aggression event. Deal 4 damage to a unit. Takes out the cell block guard. And we're going to see what happens here. I now have a shielded fleet lieutenant that has 5 strength thanks to the experience counters. And my opponent could potentially remove him if he has a maximum firepower. You could use maximum firepower, has 2 units deal damage equal to their power to an enemy unit. They have to be, I think they have to be Imperial units that you use for maximum firepower. But he could deal like 1 damage with Admiral Piet to clear the shield and then do lethal damage with the experienced Agent Callus. But unfortunately for him, he doesn't have it, and that's game. My opponent concedes the game, unable to get through the shield. So in that case, I think I made a bit of an error there by not playing that surprise strike earlier. But I think my opponent could have also been in a better spot if he had used one of his attacks from Piet or Tarkin to clear the shield off the fleet lieutenant, in addition to playing the cell block guard. Because then, even if I cleared the cell block guard as I did, he could have gone in and taken down the fleet lieutenant with Callus, which would then leave me unable to swing for lethal. So potentially a few mistakes on both sides, but this is we are both quite new to this game and these cards are quite new, and here we are. I think these were my first games with Sabine, and I think these were my opponent's first games against a non-AI. So, there you have it. Neither of us necessarily super hardened veterans with these builds. We are going to do a game two, and so let's get to game two. By the way, the last thing on command, which I did not mention, was that you can choose as an option to return a unit from your discard pile to your hand. So command is one of those double aspect cards that allows you to choose from a range of effects within that aspect's color pie. So command is double green, vigilance is double blue, and has a similar, choose 2 of 4. And I believe they've said there's going to be a card like this for every aspect. So there's going to be, double yellow card called cunning, double red card called aggression, and we'll see what those do. All right, this time Thork is going first, and we play Admiral. We see him play Admiral Yularen, or I'm sorry, Colonel Yularen. 2 cost 2/3, and when he comes in, when you play a command unit, including this one, heal 1 damage from your base. You cannot overheal in this game, so that doesn't do anything right now, but it does provide a body. I played the same Rebel Pathfinder, 2 cost 2/3 Saboteur that I was playing earlier, and I used Sabine to deal 1 damage to each base. After my opponent has taken the initiative, on to the next turn. So I see General Dodonna open fire. I got the Starwing Scout and a shoot first in hand. So this turn, I could play out the Starwing Scout. I could use the Fleet Lieutenant to have the Saboteur take down Yularen. I could just go for the base, either with the Saboteur attacking normally or with the Fleet Lieutenant. I end up resourcing Dodonna here, and it is my opponent's initiative. Opponent's playing with the dice there, maybe thinking about using Tarkin's ability for an experience token on Yularen, but we'll see what ends up happening instead. I don't think. Oh, he's actually thinking about his resources here, I think. Resource decisions are important in this game. Resourcing the right card can. I think that's going to be an area where player skill and experience really differentiates itself, with people making good or bad resource decisions and that really affecting the game in the long term. Because having the right cards, not just for your deck overall, but also for the specific matchup, can be really important. So, for example, I have a Luke deck which has some much larger units. So I have 2 copies of Home One in there right now, which is a like 8 cost, like super heavy space unit. And against an aggro deck, I'm probably going to want to resource those because the game is likely going to be over, or more or less over, by the time I would be able to deploy them. On the other hand, if I'm playing against a deck that I know is going to go for a long game, I really don't want to resource those. I want to keep them around and use them in that longer game when having a really big card could provide an advantage. So resourcing can be a very important choice in this game, and I think is going to be a key skill differentiator between more and less experienced players. In this case, my opponent opts to send in General Veers, a guy that I generally find quite strong. 3 cost 3/3, and he gives other Imperial units +1/+1. Same guy that we saw in the previous game. I decide I'm going to play a Fleet Lieutenant, 3 cost 3/3. When played, you may attack with a unit. If it's a rebel unit, it gets +2/+0. And I use the Fleet Lieutenant to trade my Pathfinder for Veers. So then my opponent uses Colonel Yularen, swings in and deals 2 damage to my base. And I have Sabine. I can now choose. I could either use Sabine's ability or take the initiative. In this case, I decided to take the initiative. Taking the initiative is another thing that I think is going to be a key skill differentiator here, and maybe one also that will be not something everyone's used to. This kind of back and forth gameplay is not what you see in all trading card games, and I think is a very interesting one. That choice of when you want to try and do more effects versus take the initiative and have that tempo advantage going into the next turn is, in my opinion, going to be pretty interesting. Okay. My opponent resources. I play a wing leader and give a +1. I give 2 experience counters to my fleet lieutenant, making him a 5/5. The experienced fleet lieutenant in the previous game got good results for me, and so now I'm doing the same thing in this game. Thork weighing his options here. I do have 1 resource left myself. 3 resources played. We do see the. It is going to be the cell block guard. I accidentally skew the zoom over to the side instead of exhausting the unit. So the cell block guard is a 3 cost 3/3 with Sentinel. So normal units have to attack the cell block guard instead of the base or other units in that arena. I use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to both bases. Colonel Yularen hits my base for 2. I deploy Sabine Wren. She is a 2/5 on attack, deal 1 damage to each enemy base. And she deploys very early, as we're seeing here. So I think my thinking here is, okay, I can use Sabine's ability, or I can use shoot first with Sabine to take down the cell block guard. My opponent does take the initiative, but then is thinking, wait a minute, hang on, I don't want to do that. While I was playing the shoot first, I'm like, okay, I'll let him take it back. He uses Tarkin's ability to give 1 experience, and I believe he gives it to Colonel Yularen here I'm not sure whether he even saw that I was playing the shoot first. So if he gave the experience to the cell block guard, I wouldn't be able to use shoot first on it, but the experienced fleet lieutenant would still be able to clear it. However, he gives the experience to Yularen instead. I play shoot first. Sabine does 3 damage and swing and does that before the opponent's damage is resolved. So that takes down the enemy cell block guard. I then swing for the base for 5 using the fleet lieutenant. 17 life to 24 life. My opponent does have a Colonel Yularen with 1 experience, but I have several units on the board. I'm feeling overall pretty good about this situation. So looking at my cards in hand, I resourced the Starwing Scout, and the reason that I did that is I had 3 3-cost cards and 1 2-cost card. Normally, I would consider Leia Organa maybe the worst of the cards in hand, and I would want to resource her. But this turn, because I had I had 3 3-cost cards and only 1 2-cost card. I resourced one of the 3 costs instead so that I could play a 3-cost and a 2-cost and get the most value out of my resources. As I think that's likely going to be better than resourcing the 2-cost card in order to play higher value cards later on. I think it's going to be more useful to get the most bang for my buck right now. Okay. My opponent does have the initiative here. Let's see what Thork ends up deciding to do with this attack. Colonel Yularen, when you play a green unit, including this one, does repair 1 damage to the base. We had an interesting rules question come up, which is, does deploying Grand Moff Tarkin trigger this ability? I believe the answer is no, because leaders are already in play. They just deploy onto the battlefield, so I don't think it's the same thing as playing a card from hand. I could be wrong, but we ended up saying that it does not apply to bringing Tarkin onto the field. Or Colonel Yularen's ability does not apply in that case. All right. Thork, Thork considering his options here. The pace of play for this game was a little slower than some of the other games that I've had, or for these games. But like I said earlier, I think Thork is relatively new to the game, and I think I am very new to playing this deck at the very least, and do not have a total sense of what I'm doing. So we were not playing at maximum pace. I decided to play Open Fire to deal 4 damage to Colonel Yularen and take him out. Not only is he an experienced unit, but I also I also don't want him to potentially be healing the enemy base. Tarkin is on the board, but Tarkin is not that threatening if he does not have a. Tarkin is not all that threatening if he does not have another unit to give experience to. So I'm thinking that my units are relatively safe here, although I could be wrong. We'll have to see what my opponent ends up playing. Sabine Wren, a experienced fleet lieutenant and a wing leader facing off against Grand Moff Tarkin. I do have a board advantage, but my opponent has not played any cards this turn, and also has yet to use his energy conversion lab to send in a unit with ambush. So while the situation does look to favor me, there's still definitely some other stuff that could happen. And we actually do see, it looks like that is Agent Callus deploying, 5 cost 4/4 with ambush. And Callus luckily is not in a position to actually kill either of my units in one go, but he does hit Sabine Wren for 4 damage, which I don't like. So Sabine takes 4 and is now on 1 life. Callus takes 2. I then decide to play Leia Organa and use her ability when played, either ready a resource or exhaust a unit, and I use it to exhaust Tarkin. Leia is a 2 cost 2/2. Pretty strong, cunning, heroic unit there. And now my opponent is fully exhausted, and I have the opportunity to just swing into the base. My opponent takes the initiative. Sabine hits the base for 2 damage plus 1 from her abilities for 3 total. I then hit the base for 5 from the fleet lieutenant, and then I'm going to hit the base for 2 more from the wing leader. So the enemy base is down to 7 life, and the situation's now looking quite good for me, I think. But we'll see what my opponent can do to fight back. Thork does have the initiative, and he still hasn't used that. He still has not used that energy conversion lab. Additionally, we could potentially also see the Callus getting a card draw here from a unique unit being killed. It seems like it would be very easy for either Leia or Sabine, or maybe even both, to be defeated this round, though Callus can only draw 1 card per turn. Thork considering his options. This is a pretty critical situation. If this turn doesn't go well for him, he could lose the game right here. Thork pays, looks like 4, playing a maximum firepower to take down the experienced fleet lieutenant. So maximum firepower combines, it has 1 Imperial unit deal damage equal to its power, and then another Imperial unit deal damage equal to its power. Yeah, friendly Imperial unit deals damage equal to its power to unit, and then another friendly Imperial unit deals damage equal to its power to the same unit. So Tarkin hits for 2, and then Callus for 4, which exceeds the 5 life on that unit. Sabine hits the enemy base for 3 total. Leia is. I have lethal on board right now from Leia and the wing leader. My opponent takes down Leia with Grand Moff Tarkin, and then gets an experience token on Callus and also a card draw from Callus's ability. When another unique unit is destroyed, you may draw a card. Use this ability only once per round. And I then swing into the base with the with the wing leader, leaving my opponent on just 2 life. Looks like a tough situation here for Thork. And he ends up conceding the game there, because in this situation, if he played anything, all I have to do is take the initiative, and my wing leader will clear out the game. or clear out the enemy base at the start of the next turn. So game two, also a victory for Sabine Wren. So we're 2-0, and we're going to do a third round here, which I will also show. So those were the first two games with Sabine, pretty effective, and we'll see whether or not I can score the trifecta here with a third win. Let's see if I can do it. And once again, this is a Cunning Sabine deck versus a Command Tarkin deck. All right, we're getting our stuff together here. I do think this matchup does somewhat favor me because the Tarkin deck is kind of a ramp type thing that has heavier units and those cards that can get your resources out faster. The problem with the cards that get resources out faster is that they aren't that efficient in terms of like value for cost right then. So you get into these situations where, if you play a resupply and that's like your whole turn, you don't do anything else. And the opponent is in the meantime doing a bunch of damage to your base with aggro stuff, you can really fall behind and you might not get an advantage. You get an opportunity to get that much value out of the resources that you are adding early. So it can really be dangerous. And on the other hand, the Super Laser Technician is kind of a better option for that. The Super Laser Technician is a 3-cost 2/1, where when he's defeated, you add him to your resources as a resource, and he actually gets added there as a readied resource. And so that's also a ramp effect, but because it provides a body as well that can kind of fight with your opponent's early units, I think it's going to be a better ramp card than Resupply in terms of a situation where you have to play ramp into aggro. All right, so we're going to draw up. This hand is looking pretty bad for me. So I have 2 copies of Chewie, who's my most expensive unit, and frankly, not that great in this deck, I think. My only early play is a C3PO, who's not that strong. I also have an ambush, one of the what is it, Auzatuk Liberator gunship, which is just not all that great, I think, in this situation either. I want to have more aggressive early plays, and so I end up deciding to mulligan, and I get a yet another Rebel Pathfinder start. I believe Thork also mulliganed and is deciding which cards to take here. All right. Thork resources 2 cards. And Thork will begin by playing Colonel Yularen yet again. We've had some kind of similar starts across these games. I think in the first game he didn't have a turn 1 play, but in the second 2 we saw Colonel Yularen taking the field. And I think in all 3 of mine, the Rebel Pathfinder has been my turn 1 play. So the 2-cost 2/3 with Saboteur, honestly not that great a unit, but does have some value in the right circumstances. My opponent will take the initiative. I will forget to use Sabine's ability here, I think, and draw up. And I believe I remember it a little later, and Thork graciously allows me to use it. And so resourcing there. Once again, I have a Fleet Lieutenant to potentially buff up my Rebel Pathfinder. I also have a Surprise Strike, a copy of Open Fire, and a second copy of Fleet Lieutenant. Using the Fleet Lieutenant to clear Colonel Yularen might be a good move. Just because Yularen represents potentially a fair amount of life gain over the course of a game, which an aggro deck really does not want to deal with. And so, yeah, so then I remember that I did not use Sabine. Thork graciously lets me use Sabine. And so we are now at 29 to 24. Thork resources a card, and yeah, here we go. Thork plays a Super Laser Technician, conveniently also healing his base thanks to Colonel Yularen, as the Super Laser Technician is a green unit. I am then, I believe, going to play that Fleet Lieutenant. That's right. And I have the Pathfinder take out Colonel Yularen, I believe, or do I do the damage? Yeah, I take out Colonel Yularen there. I think, I don't want him to have a unit that he can potentially give experience to. I don't want him to have all that healing. My opponent takes the initiative, and I then use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. And we're looking at what's going to happen on this next turn. The next turn when Sabine Wren is going to make an appearance on the field. Unless I choose not to, but I'm pretty sure I don't. In general, it's not always the case. I actually have, if you go to the first Star Wars Unlimited video that I put on this channel, there is a situation in that video where one of the players chooses not to deploy his leader and it ends up being high value, in my opinion. I think that was, yeah, if you go, it's Star Wars Unlimited TCG commented TTS gameplay, Vigilance Luke versus Command Vader. If you check out that video, there is a situation where holding back the leader ends up being really good. Um, and that's it's an interesting little facet of gameplay here. Normally, you do want to kind of deploy your leader as soon as possible, but there are sometimes those situations where holding it back can be useful. I use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. Thork brings out Agent Callus and takes down my Fleet Lieutenant. I probably should have swung with the Fleet Lieutenant before I used Sabine's ability. I was not really factoring in the potential for Agent Callus, but my opponent had that one extra resource from the super laser technician who traded with my wounded Pathfinder. I do bring out Sabine, and I then have the other Fleet Lieutenant send Sabine into the base for 5 total damage. And I'm not going to use my shoot first this turn. Draw up. So I now have an open fire, the surprise strike and shoot first that I already had, and my new draws are a wing leader and a second copy of surprise strike. I decided to resource one of the surprise strikes to keep more options available in terms of cards I can potentially play. I do think that ambush there from Agent Callus was pretty nasty for me. Would have been better for me to swing earlier with the Fleet Lieutenant. Sorry about that, guys. Would have been better to swing earlier with the Fleet Lieutenant, but I did not see that coming. So, you live and learn. You live and learn. Thork, figuring out his play, does still have the initiative. One thing in this game is sometimes there are situations where you want to like kind of stall. So like using Sabine's ability is a good example of a stalling type move where it takes your turn, but it doesn't show the opponent that you're passing. And it also doesn't like give away what you're going to do with your resources. So in some situations that might be good to see what your opponent is going to play. But in that situation, because my opponent had a way to quickly take down my Fleet Lieutenant, and ended up losing me significant damage that I otherwise would have been able to do. So in this case, my opponent plays an overwhelming barrage, giving Agent at Callus +2/+2, and dealing damage equal to his new power of 6 spread across my units. So it deals 5 damage to Sabine, defeating her immediately, and with 1 leftover damage onto the Fleet Lieutenant. Then, when a unique unit's defeated, he can draw a card. So strong play there with Agent Callus. Very annoying for me. It also gives Agent Callus +2 defense this turn. I am able, however, to use shoot first to deal 4 damage to Agent Callus with the Fleet Lieutenant and deal my combat damage before him, which means that I don't die on retaliation. So could have been a lot worse for me, but luckily I had that card and was able to make a more favorable move there. I could have also just played the open fire to kill Agent Callus, but in this situation, I wanted to bring out this wing leader to give 2 experience to my Fleet Lieutenant, which now means that the Fleet Lieutenant is not in range to be killed by Tarkin. Wing leader is a 3-cost 2/1. When played, give 2 experience tokens to a friendly rebel unit. Very strong card, one of my favorite cards actually. So now I have my Fleet Lieutenant as a 5/5. If Tarkin attacks him, it will be greatly to my opponent's detriment. And my opponent has to decide, does he want to attack with Tarkin to deal 2 damage to my base, or does he want to just take the initiative here? And I think he decides to take the initiative, which I think is the correct choice. So he could do 2 damage to the base, but then I would take the initiative. And I think he decides that I don't need to start doing damage to the base necessarily. What I need to do is try and stabilize. And in service of trying to stabilize the overall situation, it's better to take the initiative and then hopefully have some kind of card that can deal with the fleet lieutenant before he gets a chance to attack and hit the base for 5 damage. It's an interesting scenario. The aggro matchups, some of the valuations change compared to when you have kind of a mid-range versus mid-range situation or some other scenario where uh there's less clearly one defined aggressor and one more player going for the longer term. So in this situation, I am trying to kind of race my opponent down quickly before his larger units come online, and he is trying to stop me. And so there's kind of more defined player roles than you always get. There is a very cool article. It's called "Who's the Beatdown?" It's an article from Magic: The Gathering, actually, but it's very relevant in this game as well as several other games, quite frankly. And it's by a guy named Mike Flores. Mike Flores. I don't know how to pronounce that. I am going to actually try and link to it in the description of this video. Who's the Beatdown by Mike Flores? Really strong article. One of the things that I really recommend people read it. It was originally written for Magic: The Gathering. It was written a long time ago, but it stayed relevant in all kinds of games, and I think it's very relevant here as well. In these, it's very important to know who the player is that is going for aggression and who's going to be in more of a control position. All right, going into this next turn, I have a General Dodonna and a Wing Leader here, as well as the Surprise Strike and Open Fire already in hand. So probably this turn, what I'm going to try to do is play 5 worth of stuff by doing either Wing Leader or Open Fire plus the Surprise Strike. My board is considerably better than his, and I'm ahead on life, but he has more cards in hand and more resources than me, in part because I've stopped resourcing, and my opponent has kept up with it. And also, he did have that ramp from from the Super Laser Technician. My opponent now uses his Energy Conversion Lab to get a powerful threat onto the board. Play a unit that costs 6 or less, and it gets ambush. And it's going to be an ATST. That is not what I want to see. ATST is a 6/7 with Overwhelm. And so the ATST 6/7 Overwhelm. So Overwhelm is when you attack and defeat an enemy unit, you deal any excess damage to the base. And so the ATST clears out my Fleet Lieutenant and deals 2 damage to my base as well. Not what I want to see. So that energy conversion lab coming in clutch there. Otherwise, if you didn't have something that would have allowed him to take down that fleet lieutenant quickly, that would have been 5 damage to the base. All right, so then we do see, I play a fleet lieutenant. I play not a fleet lieutenant, a wing leader, and I buff my other wing leader. So I now have a ship there that is 4/2 and another one that's 2/1. My opponent hits my base with Grand Moff Tarkin, giving an experience counter to his ATST, or an experience token. I then play the surprise strike that I have in hand to send in my wing leader at +3, inflicting 7 damage on the enemy base. Surprise strike is a very strong card. I think it's going to be a key card for aggro right now because it does allow you to deal damage to the enemy base directly, and that can be a pretty useful thing. Most of the burn cards in this game, like Open Fire, do not actually have the ability to hit the enemy's base. They only hit units. I do think it's possible we'll see more effects that damage the base directly in the full card pool, but at least for now, a lot of burn doesn't. So cards like Surprise Strike that have the ability to deal that damage to the base can be extra valuable. I have another Surprise Strike here, which actually means I think I have potential lethal this turn. Depending on the situation, because I can, in theory, Surprise Strike in. If I surprise strike the experienced guy in, that's 7 damage, and then I can hit for 2 and use Sabine's ability and actually win the game. But that assumes that I'm going to get my units uncontested, and we will see whether or not that is a correct assumption. My opponent plays Command. That's that multi-choice card. Once again, he's going to give 2 experience tokens to a unit, and then deal damage equal to a unit's power to a non-unique enemy. So in this case, I think he's going to buff up his ATST and then deal damage to my wing leader, taking it out. The experienced wing leader defeated by the command card there, which does put me in a tougher spot. And so he still has 3 resources floating. He forgot to resource that turn, but I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead. I decide I'm going to play my surprise strike here, send in my wing leader for 5. My opponent brings out an Emperor's Royal Guard. I use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. My opponent swings with Tarkin for 2 damage to my base and gives another experience counter to his ATST. His very experienced ATST. I think it now has 4 experience on it, 2 from the command and 2 from Tarkin, which means that it actually hits my base for 10. So that means that 2 swings from that ATST will actually win the game. And I have to think about what I'm doing here. So I decide that I'm going to play out General Dodonna. And the reason that I do this is if my opponent, so my opponent has a Sentinel unit with that Emperor's Royal Guard. It has Sentinel because he has Tarkin in play, who's an official. I can't attack his base with Dodonna directly. However, Dodonna gives my wing leader +1/+0. And that does mean that my wing leader can now swing for 3. And with the enemy on 4 life, if the wing leader swings for 3, it's not going to win the game. But if I were to draw a surprise strike, a fleet lieutenant, or a shoot first, any of those buffs coupled with Dodonna's buff would allow me to win the game with that swing from the wing leader. And my opponent is now we're going through the discard pile here to see what's available in that area. So I've already used 2 surprise strikes, 1 shoot first, and 2 fleet lieutenants, which means that in the deck there is, in theory, 1 surprise strike, 2 copies of shoot first, and 1 fleet lieutenant. Any of which will win me the game if he allows Dodonna to stay on the board. If he kills Dodonna, then only the fleet lieutenant or surprise strike would allow me to win the game immediately. But it means that I have more life and it will take him longer to kill me, which might actually put him in a worse spot depending on what exactly ends up happening. So he's trying to decide if he goes for my base, he can then I then only have one action with which to kill him or suppress his ATST or whatever. If he goes for Dodonna, then it's safer for him. I don't have that chance to top deck an instant win as much because the shoot firsts will no longer win the game immediately. But it then means he can attack with his ATST and win. So I draw and I do not see what I need. I don't have one of those damage cards that I could use to potentially close out the game. So that is going to do it. And I concede the game here and I flip over the surprise strike that I had resourced a little while ago. And I'm talking about how I had kept that open fire and not played it. And a different resourcing decision there might have allowed me to win the game. I think the surprise strike would have been a better card to keep, would have let me do that little bit of extra damage that I needed to win, and that kind of goes to show the importance of the right resourcing decisions. I do also think I could have gotten the extra damage I needed to win if I had attacked with that fleet lieutenant earlier when he got picked off by Callus, and that would have been another 3 damage, which would have meant that the wing leader was then poised to win the game. But I did not do those things, and Thork got the win here. There may well have been other opportunities that he had that I didn't see here because I don't know his cards in hand. And so that's gonna do it. That's gonna do it for this series of games. We end up going 2-1 with Sabine taking 2 wins and 1 loss against Tarkin here. So yeah, that's going to be about it for this video. Thought it would be nice to show some more aggressive gameplay. Sabine Wren's card pool is very limited. She's the only heroic aggression card we've seen. But even with this limited card pool, I honestly think she's pretty fun and definitely a very different style of play from some of the other builds that we've seen in Star Wars Unlimited. So yeah, that's Sabine for you. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited video content. There is a chance I'll be doing some Flesh and Blood as well. We'll have to see. Catch you guys later.